incorporated now in the identifiers when the phone rings.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Toronto Police Services Board meeting for April. The meeting properly constituted, let me call it to order and start by recognizing that we acknowledge the land that we're meeting on as the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, and the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now the home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto was covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Let me move from there to the confirmation of the minutes of the meeting held on March the 26th, but there is a deputation on that. Is it, and it's Kris Langenfeld.
Yep.
Five minutes, 1 minute.
I did have one point on the actual minutes, but I also would like to know why the agenda wasn't published until 7 o'clock Friday night or Thursday night on a Easter long weekend. Was that intentional? Because you certainly, according to all the dates of these reports, you had all the information 2 days beforehand, but it was 7 p.m. on Thursday, the start of a 2-day statutory holiday. So really this agenda has only been published for 1.5 business days, contrary to the 5-day clear business days that are required under the Act and the board's bylaws.
So I was the acting chair during the chair's absence, so I'll take responsibility for the delay in getting the materials out. We were all dancing as fast as we can, and I appreciate that we do need to get them out, even on long weekends.
Well, and particularly on statutory religious holidays where, I mean, myself, I've had a day to basically scan through this, so I'm sure I'll have a few questions that will be because of the fact that I haven't had a opportunity to read all the documents, so I hope that won't be a regular thing. I did just want to raise on the minutes from last month. We had there was the item, and I don't remember. I think it was item 7 on the list here, but it's minute P53, the request to restructure conducted energy weapon reporting that was withdrawn at the end of or before the meeting, and when it got announced, it was told it was withdrawn. And I just want to bring up the fact that it was said when mentioning it at that point that this matter had been spoken to at the confidential meeting in the morning and that you'd been told that it was going to be withdrawn. I'd like to point out, though, that of course the Police Services Act requires that all meetings be held in public, and you shouldn't be the board isn't supposed to be going over the agenda in private and coming up with private agreements and backroom deals onto what you're going to say so that you can come out and present a united front to us. The whole point of that legal requirement in the Police Services Act is that everything you're dealing with, unless it deals with private confidential information, financial information, and something that would be potentially dangerous to an individual, should be done in public. And so I hope that will be the case in future. I just wanted to raise that point. That's it. Thank you.
Good point. Thank you, Kris. Any comments? Thank you, Kris. With that, may I have a motion to approve the minutes of the March 26th meeting and receive the deputation? Ms. Molnar, seconded. Mr. Jeffers, all in favor? Any contrary? Let us go quickly through there's quite a number of items, and then I would recommend that since we have Ms. Massaquoi here, that we move item number 6, I think it is, up first, but let's go through the agenda first. So item number 2 is amendments to the board policies outlined in the HRTO settlement. Motion, so there's deputations, we'll hold for that. Item number 3 is special constable appointments, reappointments. A motion to approve. Motion to approve item number 3. Ms. Molnar, seconded. Mr. Jeffers, all in favor? Any contrary? It's carried. Item number 4 is the amendment to increase the value of the existing contract through 2019 the Intellig Go networks, etc., for Palo Alto hardware, software maintenance, etc. There is a deputation, so we will hold that. Item number 5 is the amendment to increase the value of existing contract for 2019 of the Senior Human Resource Project Manager contract extension. A motion to approve or hold. Thank you.
No, I have a question.
Yep. You have a question?
Yeah, can you hold it?
Yes, hold it. Item number 6 is the Anti-Racism Advisory. There's a presentation, so as I said, I'll move that up. We'll hold that and move it up to the first thing we deal with. Item number 7 is a deputation. Item number 8 is the operating budget variance for the service the year ending December 31st, 2018. Motion to receive. Ms. Molnar and Mayor Tory, all in favor? Any contrary? Carried. Thank you. Item number 9 is the operating budget variance for the service parking enforcement for December 31st, 2018. Motion to receive. Ms. Molnar and Mayor Tory again, all in favor? Any contrary? That's carried. Item number 10 is the variance for the board ending December 31st, 2018. Motion to receive. Ms. Chandrasekera, seconded Mr. Jeffers. All in favor? Any contrary? That's carried. Item number 11, there is a motion, there's a deputation rather, as there is for 12. Item number 13 is the annual report, 2018 activities expenditures for the community consultative groups. Any motion to receive? Actually, I've got a question, so I will hold it. Item number 14 is the annual report, the service board's consulting expenditures, the deputation, so it's held. Item number 15 is the annual report 2018, the consulting expenditures for the service. A motion to receive. Ms. Molnar, seconded. Councillor Nunziata, all in favor? Any contrary? That's carried. Item number 16 is the annual report for 2018 public sector salary disclosure. Motion to receive. Mayor Tory and Ms. Chandrasekera, all in favor? Any contrary? Thank you. Item number 17 is a deputation, so we'll hold. Item number 18 is the same thing. Item number 19 is the same thing. Item number 20 is the walk-on item, which is the retention of transgender subject matter expert. Motion to approve. Are there any deputations for that?
I didn't have that in my agenda.
It was a walk-on item, so you don't. Have you got it? Have we given them a copy? You've got a copy now?
No.
What's the walk-on item?
It's item number 20, Derek. It's retention of a transgender subject matter expert. So I'll come back to it. We'll hold it and come back to it. How's that, guys? So that takes us through the agenda. Let's start, as I said, with number 6, which is Ms. Chandrasekera and Ms. Massaquoi, the co-chairs of the Anti-Racism Advisory Panel. So, Notisha, thank you, first of all, for all the work you're doing for us and the time you spend. And second, thanks for being here today.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and I'm very pleased to be able to give a very brief second quarter report on what has been a very lengthy process that the Anti-Racism Advisory Panel has undertaken since our last report. So just by way of context, our work was initially intended to focus specifically on the establishment of a monitoring framework for the board to use in assessing the response to and implementation of each of the LOCU inquest recommendations. The ARAP's mandate was expanded by the board to include policy development on race-based data collection, monitoring, and public reporting on the part of the TPS and the board. And this decision, as you can see in the report, was largely influenced by the Ontario Human Rights Commission interim report on the inquiry into racial profiling and racial discrimination of Black persons by by the Toronto Police Service. I would also like to add that I believe it was largely informed by the City of Toronto's anti-Black racism strategy, which had been discussed, as well as the province of Ontario's data standards for monitoring and identifying systemic racism, as well as countless requests, research, and reports coming directly from Black community members, Indigenous communities, and other racialized groups in the city. So I think the board is making a very timely and bold step with the redirection request to the panel. I also want to commend the service members who have been very committed to this process with us and have engaged in some very difficult conversations. So the ARAP focus has shifted slightly to the development of a new policy concerning the collection of race-based data. And since our last report to the board, we've met extensively as a panel. We have discussed this issue extensively, and we have engaged in research and consulted extensively, as you can see from the report that you have. This has been a very lengthy but very comprehensive process involving research that also looks at best practices both domestically and internationally, specifically on the collection of race-based data. And as you can imagine, a panel that consists of community members, subject matter experts, service members, as well as board members, there has been not only substantive discussion, but also great debate concerning the variety of approaches to the collection, the analysis, and public reporting of race-based data, both in the policing context, and we also looked at other service delivery models such as healthcare, which is the area that I have expertise in. We also consulted extensively with various organizations who have themselves either conducted race-based data collection or advised on it, and we were provided with numerous presentations and approaches that have been taken in various jurisdictions. We looked at both strengths and weaknesses in all of those presentations, and most notably the presentations from the Ontario Human Rights Commission, as well as the Ontario's Anti-Racism Directorate, and presentations from the service were very influential in our development of the policy. We spent an enormous amount of time, and I don't want to say enormous as in too much. I don't think there could never have been too much time spent with the service and understanding the system, the tools that are currently used, how the data is currently collected. We received presentations on police records, how they're maintained, how issues of retention are addressed, as well as public access to records and correction to records. So based on all of this information, the board staff very quickly, they had a short space of time, created a preliminary draft report, which I believe was excellent in terms of being a best-in-class policy. And as part of this work, they also looked at similar policies and literature across Canada as well as around the world. So we believe we're presenting you with a very excellent, if not one of the best policies on the collection of race-based data in respect to policing. Along with that policy, we received a consultation plan, and it proposes an in-person as well as online consultations with over 50 subject matter experts, community organizations, as well as service members. And we feel in order to present you with what we believe is a best-in-class policy, we respectfully are asking for an extension in terms of, we engaged in a very insular process. I understand that. When we developed the policy, what we'd like to do is to do an extensive external consultation with key stakeholders and community groups. We would like to conduct this over the next 3 months and bring a policy forward to you for the board to review in September, for the September board meeting.
Thank you, Notisha. Excellent. Anything that you want to add?
Yeah, I just thank you, Ms. Massaquoi. I think I want to just echo your comments. The panel has been really engaged. We met over several days, and the discussions were really thoughtful and intentional. And as stated, there has been debate about what's the best approach. So I really, first of all, want to thank you for your leadership. It's been really wonderful to work with you. And I also really want to thank the panel members, both on the service side and the community side. I think they've been very forthright and honest about the challenges, but also a strong commitment on all sides to make this happen. And lastly, I really want to thank Ryan and the team too. This has been a really thoughtful piece of work, and I'm really looking forward to us going out to community to consult on the draft policy this summer.
Colleagues, questions, discussion? Marie and then Ken?
Agree that there's an extraordinary amount of work that has been done, and I appreciate the request for timing. And when I heard that you wanted to come back in September, it occurred to me that you have a whole summer where people might be more difficult to reach. So I'm assuming you've calculated that the absences of people over the summer won't significantly impair your time frame.
I believe that we are ready to go, so we're not going to wait until June to start. We are starting immediately after this meeting to begin those consultations and to let people know that there is a draft policy, this is the process, and hoping that people would be willing to engage in that process.
That's great, and I hope so too. I don't think anything like this has ever been done before, and one of my observations is about the importance of documenting it. So the reports are great, and perhaps you, and I had a chance to have a brief chat with your co-chair, can look at ways that we might capture this as best in class and best practices, because I think it could take us to the international level. And I also mentioned that between now and the conclusion of your work, there's parallel work going on inside the service that's not on the same point, but for example, the street check work and the community survey. So I'm confident that you'll make sure that you and the service connect so that as the board and the service are out consulting, we look like we each know what each other is doing and take advantage of any alignment and opportunities.
Absolutely. We started this process as a collaborative one, and we want to emphasize that it is a collaboration between community and service, and so we were going to proceed back into community in that framework.
Thank you.
There's no doubt that you've done a lot of work here, and I certainly, we all appreciate that very much. However, in the extensive consultations that are about to take place, as well as all of the research that you've done, some may argue that there have been a lot of initiatives around race and anti-racism, and we know that. Have you looked, or are you going to be looking at some of the challenges of implementation so that they can be, that can be built into the plan? Because this, just based on my little experience, that this has been a major issue that is not always adequately and effectively addressed or planned to, and so forth. So what's your view on that?
Just so I'm clear, the implementation of the policy.
Yeah, yes, and policies that are similar in nature, racism, dealing with racism. And, you know, there have been opportunities and all initiatives that, as I said, have been taken, and I know you're fully aware of that in the past and now we're in the present. And I'm just asking whether the barriers of implementation, because some of them have not been implemented, when some of us have done the evaluation of the effectiveness of all of these various initiatives. Are you looking at that?
So not to be cheeky, if it's not implemented, then I'll be doing deputations. But after doing all of this work, but the policy is extremely well thought out, and I think every step has been about addressing those challenges. We have a lot of people sitting at the table who have extensive experience in history with understanding the difficulties in terms of implementing any policies that are dealing with race and anti-racism, and specifically anti-Black racism. Right. So the policy also incorporates some of the tools and ability for the board to monitor and evaluate effectively so that we can overcome some of those challenges. But there's also mechanisms to constantly be reviewing that policy. So it's not a policy that is just developed once and it's not going to be continually assessed and evaluated for effectiveness. And we're also looking at a phased-in approach so that there's success. We want this to be successful in terms of implementation. So I think the policy that you will end with is one where you can see that we are going to be looking at phases of implementation and evaluation continuously throughout the process. I don't know if Uppala would like to add some pieces to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really good question that you raised, Ken. There are service members around the table who've been providing a lot of advice and also raising, like, here's what it practically will look like. And that's been very helpful for the whole panel to hear, where some situations it will be easier to implement and other situations it will not be. So I think that's been the real benefit and beauty of having both community members and service members together talking about this issue, because we want to create a policy that will be implemented effectively across the service.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's important that we manage expectations. We all know what the end goal is. We all know what we want at the end. And I think we have to work very patiently in terms of moving things forward with the service and the tools and resources that are available at this point in time. Some of the things that we're requesting require changes in technology. So we also have to take those things into account as well, but I believe that the panel's focus is success. So we are going to work towards that goal.
Because I would also suggest that, in looking at the transformation, the modernization that we've been talking about, one of the major points has been the culture of the organization. And I'm sure you're looking at all of that. And I know that would likely be a challenge because it's historical, et cetera, right? So I wish you all the best in making it happen.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. Other questions, colleagues, discussion? If not, Notisha, thank you again for, and Uppala for tremendous, I know a lot of work's been put into it, and Ryan, the work that you and the board staff have done as well. So congratulations and thank you. Is there something you're talking about, an extension? Do we need to make a motion to extend? Okay, so all we need to do then is receive the report. So motion to receive. Ms. Muller, seconded Ms. Chandrasekera. All in favor? Any contrary? Carried unanimously. Again, Notisha, thank you so much. It's hugely appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, that takes us back then to item number 2, where there is a deputation. Is it 1 or 2? There are 2 deputations. The first one is Derek Moran. Derek, 5 minutes, and I'll give you a 1-minute warning.
I just want to say, by me speaking at this meeting, this shall not be deemed to be in any way my consent expressed or implied, and doing so is fraud. God bless Her Majesty the Queen, and long live Her Majesty the Queen. And as the bylaws of this board apply to a person, if I have ever led the Toronto Police Services Board to believe in any way that I am a person, then that would be a mistake, and that I ask this board to please forgive me, because you guys don't define person in your definition section. So in this role, I just want to point out when Vice Chair Marie Molnar here mentioned about acting chair, what I thought she was getting at was how it says on the City of Toronto's own website that your appointment date, being a member of this board, Chair Pringle, ended on November 30th, 2018. Let the record show that it's April 25th, 2019. So good to see that you're still here.
Thank you.
So in this report, it mentions the Toronto Police Services Board is committed to the principle that every person has a right to receive police services without discrimination, including harassment, contrary to the Ontario Human Rights Code, and that every member of the Toronto Police Service has a right to work in an environment that is free of discrimination, including harassment, contrary to the code. I'm going to recommend an addition to this, and that it be added. The Toronto Police Services Board is also committed to the principle that Derek and Miguel can attend the board meetings free of harassment from Councillor Nunziata telling us that we can't clap here, as clapping is obviously a form of expression guaranteed by Section 2B of the Constitution she took an oath to uphold, so help her God, and without the implied threat of violence being used against us when she comments, "You guys wouldn't get away with that at City Hall." So I just want to acknowledge Chief Saunders and the fine, upstanding common law peace officers here who did not assault us and drag us out of here for simply doing this. Oh, I know, terrible. However, also notice that this passage from this report doesn't say that every member of the Toronto Police Services Board has a right to work in an environment that is free of discrimination, including harassment contrary to the code. So you remember that affidavit I talked about last month, Dion Rene, Justice Kavanaugh admitted into the record, City of Toronto lawyer Fred Fisher, lawyer for the board, has a copy of. This is from paragraph 5 of that affidavit. In the spring of 2017, I bumped into then Toronto Police Services Board member, Councillor Shelley Carroll at the Canada Square movie theaters located at Yonge and Eglinton as I was walking out of the theater after having just seen a movie. Councillor Carroll and I sat and talked for about 20 minutes. One of the things Councillor Carroll said to me was that she thought the Toronto Police Services Board was no place for those who were wealthy, well-off, well-to-do to be a member of, because how could they possibly be able to relate to someone who feels they have been marginalized and abused by police? Paragraph number 6. Councillor Shelley Carroll also told me that she had been subjected to harassment while a member of the Toronto Police Services Board. Paragraph number 7. Councillor Shelley Carroll did not bother this time around at the start of the new term of council to put her name on the list to become a member of the Toronto Police Services Board again. So Councillor Shelley Carroll resigns from this board, and only because she ran provincially, gets clobbered like most of those running for the Fibberals, runs for city council again and wins. Wouldn't it seem logical then that she would look to get back onto the Toronto Police Services Board here? I mean, she asked by far the most questions while she was here, so she was obviously more than engaged in what she was doing while here. Yet, as I just said, she didn't even bother to put her name on the list to become a member of the Toronto Police Services Board again at the start of the new term of council. Chair Andy Pringle, were you aware at any point that Councillor Shelley Carroll allegedly was subjected to harassment while she was a member of the Toronto Police Services Board? You're shaking your head no?
I'll give you a 1-minute warning.
You gonna answer my question? For the second time, as you haven't answered my question, I will ask the question again. Chair Andy Pringle, were you aware at any point that Councillor Shelley Carroll allegedly was subjected to harassment while she was a member of the Toronto Police Services Board? Are you gonna answer my question?
Maybe the lawyer can answer that question.
For the third time, because I know
Derek,
Masons
you
love,
know
I know
how
Masons
we
love
operate,
everything in
don't you?
threes. Chair Andy Pringle, were you aware at any point that Councillor Shelley Carroll allegedly was subjected to harassment while she was a member of the Toronto Police Services Board? It's a simple yes or no answer.
Derek, you
I've
have
asked you
7
3
seconds.
times.
I'm not a Mason.
No, I mean, there's probably some in the room.
Derek, thank you very much.
I know it's an
Thank you for your
awkward
deputation.
question. You don't want to address
Are
it?
there any
Was Councillor Carroll lying to me when she
colleagues?
said that?
private conversation? I don't know, Derek.
You guys going to
Colleagues,
investigate it at least?
Are there any
You're going to follow up
questions
on
of
it to see
Derek?
if it's true? Like, I know, you're not supposed to lie in an affidavit.
Derek, are there any questions for Derek? If not, Derek, thank you very much.
Let the record show that the chair of the Toronto Police Services Board, Andy Pringle, did not answer my question on whether he was aware that Councillor Shelley Carroll allegedly was subjected to
Derek, thank
harassment
you.
while she was a member of the Toronto Police Services Board.
Kris, thanks.
I didn't actually have much to say on your report, but it raised an issue that has I've noticed before and haven't had an opportunity to speak to the board on, which is the classification of the two restrooms here have become transgendered restrooms, and so there is no men and women's restroom, which wasn't previously a problem. Those of you that know about health will know that urinals are apparently healthier than for gentlemen than relieving themselves into a toilet bowl, and before I would always simply go to the other side of the hall here and use the marked washrooms there. However, those are now cordoned off, of course, and people aren't allowed in that part of the building, nor would I mention are they allowed to access the chapel here, which I think on the police website says it is open to the public, but I guess that's not really true. And I suppose that's another section of Section 2B of the Charter, the freedom of religion, that we could challenge these searches on again. But I'd simply like to raise the point that I certainly can understand why people might choose to want to have washrooms available that aren't specifically identified as men's or women's. And I know the rest of the world seems to have gone with family, a third family restroom somewhere that parents can go in and take care of their children, or transgendered people can go in and it's not identified by gender. But the fact that the public had to pay to tear out all the urinals from the men's washroom so that two of the washrooms, and the only ones on this floor anyways that are actually accessible by the public, are now no longer, people have the option of choosing. And other than the urinal issue, it doesn't really matter to me, but I can certainly imagine a woman that's been subjected to an violent rape not wanting to be in a washroom where a man might walk in while she's in the locked in the little cubicle, and having the option to make the choice to have access to an actual private women's washroom or men's washroom, I would think would be appropriate. So other than that, I certainly commend the board on looking at its policies, and the amendments there and the procedures and policies certainly seem to make sense for me regarding classifying that nobody should be subjected to any kind of discrimination, whether it's black racism, transgendered racism, or anything else. But I would say it's always the issue of the treatment that people receive, as much as it is why they're receiving it. It's not fair that somebody is treated badly because of their race or because of their sexual orientation, but the problem is that they're treated badly in the first place, and we should be dealing with the fact that anybody is treated improperly, whether they be of a different race, white or otherwise. It doesn't matter. So anyways, thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Any questions for Chris? If not, thanks.
And I'll just mention, since I have a 2-minute, item number 4 here, I couldn't find what my comments were going to be, so you can just skip over me for that for the next one.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Colleagues, any discussion on this? If not, a motion to approve and receive the deputations. Ms. Chandrasekera, seconded. Ms. Muller, all in favor? Any contrary? That's carried. Thank you. Item number 4, there was a deputation. There's only one, so we can just go on to ask if colleagues, if you have any questions on that. If not, may we have a motion to approve it?
I move that we approve item 4.
Are there? Let me just review it. I thought there was going to be a deputation, so I'm not.
There wasn't. Mr. Langenfeld just withdrew.
No, I agree, but I thought that we had a question on it. I had a question. Okay, so let's take item number 4 then. Marie, you're moving to approve item number 4. A seconder. Ms. Chandrasekera, all in favor? Any contrary? That's carried. Thank you. Item number 5, that was Councillor Nunziata. You wanted to hold that item?
Who am I asking? So I just had the one question. So the existing contract that we had was only to May 2019, correct? And you're asking for an extension to December?
Correct. Correct. The contract actually can go till the end of December. It was a contract for that included some extensions that actually take us to the end of this year.
Okay, so the original contract, an option to extend.
Correct.
So at that point, then, I thought I had it on. I have that. So at that point, when we did renew that contract, we felt that it was only to May that it was needed, or like,
Yeah.
I'm just wondering why we didn't do it to December then, because would there have been savings or anything at that time if we had renewed it for the till December?
So when we were looking at this, we anticipated until May of this year, and then we would, with the ability to extend, we could reassess, do we need that extension? And so we've now gone through that period and the work that has been done and the work that is being done and still is required. And so to continue the work that we're doing within the HR modernization, we're asking for the extension. The extension actually puts us over the amount, so we have to come to the board. But in the meantime, what we are doing, there were project managers that were approved within the HR organizational structure. So we are engaging activities to actually recruit that. So job descriptions are being developed, and we anticipate that they will be recruited through May and most likely be brought on board in the fall, so that with this contract extension, not only does the work continue, but when they are brought on board, the transition from consultant to employee actually can happen.
Okay, so that was so we included that in when we for our budget. Yes. The additional. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Did also, I think you've answered the question, but this is this a person or a person and a team of people that we've employed for this period of time to really get us going with the project, but eventually that expertise which we'll need going forward is going to be hired, which was your answer a second ago, right?
Yes, that's correct, and it is one person.
It is one person?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions, colleagues? If not, thank you, Deputy McLean. If not, a motion to approve item number 5. Councillor Nunziata, seconded. Ms. Mulliner, all in favor? Any contrary? That's carried. Item number 6 we've done. Item number 7, which is the budget requirement. There is a deputation, and that is Mr. Langenfeld.
Hello again. A few more items here. So there's mention of body-worn video, and it says a non-binding RFP, request for proposal, is scheduled to be issued in the second quarter of 2019. And so I'd like to ask that before that RFP is actually issued, if it could be presented to the board so that the public has an opportunity to see what the service is intending on proceeding on, so that we can just give our input on it before the time and effort is spent in actually putting that out. On the vehicle and equipment life cycle replacements section, there is 0.7 million in electronic services, or electronic surveillance. Plans are dependent on partner agencies. Discussions are underway. And so I'm just hoping for some public disclosure on what electronic surveillance the service is currently engaged in. Obviously not to disclose any confidential information, but simply an overview of, in fact, where the money's being spent on these kind of things. $500,000 on live scan machines for fingerprinting, and so I'm just wondering, I believe that's just replacement of existing machines that are, I assume, outdated, which then I don't have a lot of questions on, but if there is any change or expansion in the amount of fingerprinting that the service is doing, then I'm just curious to have that information. And then generally, and this may also relate to item 17, the 2018 Police Cooperative Purchasing Group purchases, has to do with the vehicles. And we all will remember that in 2013 17 or 16, wherever it was, there were some questions actually brought from City Council to the service here by Shelley Carroll, I believe, questioning the switch over from white vehicles to the military battlefield gray. And now, in response to that, the service actually put out a survey, and it surveyed both service members and the public. And if memory serves, something like 80% of the service members said that they thought the important thing was that the vehicle color demonstrated their authority, and that they thought that gray was the appropriate way to go. And that, if memory serves, I think it was close to 80% of the public thought the opposite, and that the important thing was the openness and attitude that police presented, and that they wanted the white vehicles. With a number of options that were given in the survey. But it seems that I've noticed that a lot of I still seem to be seeing more and more of these gray and the ghost vehicles that were relatively unmarked. I've seen a number of SUVs out there in this battlefield gray. And so I'm wondering if, in fact, are we still continuing to convert over vehicle colors? Have we ordered a bunch that are already on a color that the democracy here has said that they don't want, and we're somehow bound to continue that process, or what? I personally favor the white police vehicles, and apparently the public did, according to the service's public survey. So I would expect that that would be the way we're going. So I would hope maybe we could have some disclosure of the number of vehicles that are one color or the other, or what design they are, and how many are unmarked, and just big overall numbers, so that the public can know where we're going, and maybe a breakdown of what those numbers were 2 or 3 years ago before we started changing over, and what they've since become. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Any questions for Mr. Langenfeld? If not, I just say the RFP is already been issued, I suspect, but is that correct, Tony? But we did do 2 years ago, Chris, an extensive consultation, pilot project, which came to the board and had lots of discussion then. And then the process will be that an RFP comes out, and then there will come to a recommendation to the board for approval, and there's a further opportunity for discussion then on that. Body-worn cameras, I think, is something that, is a long-term process. A number of people jumped off the wagon pretty quickly in the States and had problems with it, one thing and another. But, from a transparency point of view, we think it's important, it's expensive, but it's a long process.
I understand what you're saying, but the reality is, of course, after the pilot project, what the service and the board came back to the public with was that this would be moving forward. There would be lots of discussion before we moved forward on it, and in fact, that still hasn't happened. Now it's that, well, we'll do the RFP and come back once the service has some more concrete information to come up with better numbers from the
once it's got a plan. Right now, we've just done a pilot project and discussion and evaluation, including an opportunity for when that came to this board a couple of years ago. And then a lot of work's been done subsequently to kind of go out and put an RFP in place. It's got to come back to approval here with a plan.
And the fact that it's out, obviously, we can't talk about it before it goes out. So we'll have discussions, I guess, once that information comes back. But I would suggest that public input may have changed what you would have been asking for in the RFP. And so it would have been ideal, from my point of view, to have that conversation first. But as we say, the time's gone, so be it.
Okay. That's great. Colleagues, any questions for Chris? If not, any discussion on this item number 7? If not, a motion to, sorry, Francis.
Question to staff, if they just clarify on at the last page, closure of capital projects completed in 2018. Any when all outstanding payments have been made, any deficiencies have been addressed. What deficiencies?
This would be on facilities projects where we've achieved substantial completion, but there's always little things that have to be fixed before we actually take ownership of the work. And so once that has happened, that's when we close the report. We actually do a report to the board on lessons learned, things that went well, and then we advise the CFO at the city that the project is closed, and she basically closes the books on the funding for the project.
So any of these deficiencies caused an increase in the budget?
We're hoping that, in fact, we negotiate on some of these. Some of them are just contractual and they have to meet them. Others, there's always a discussion that occurs where they may have a different view than us, but we push very hard to have all those deficiencies corrected.
Thank you.
Colleagues, with that, motion to receive the deputation and receive the report. The Mayor Tory and Ms. Muller, all in favor? Any contrary? Carried unanimously. Thank you. That takes us to item number 11, and there is one deputation, and he is sitting in the chair.
So just two issues on this. First, you'll remember when this was brought before the end of the year, Councillor Nunziata actually said, well, City Council would be reviewing the budget and approving it, and Mayor Tory said that a line-by-line budget would be provided to the city before the budget was approved, and yet in all these stacks of paper that's in here on budget information from the city, there isn't really the police budget. There's the total amount, and we have lots of other city projects and city budget approval information that has nothing to do with policing, but what we don't have here is the actual police budget and the line-by-line information, and obviously it's well after the fact. We're not going to be having any discussion about it. The other matter is that back in September 2017, at the first meeting of the Budget Committee, which was the one time I was able to get into the meetings before I started being physically removed, one of the things that I'd asked for was a breakdown of the total of the city's expenses in insurance costs, and particularly those breakdowns, how they related to policing, and basically how much our taxpayers spending for insurance premiums, which don't appear on the budget anywhere, but that are consumed into the City of Toronto's budget, but in fact relate to insurance costs for awards against policing issues such as the G20, and I think we all expect a few millions or hundreds of millions of dollars going there. So I think we had talked about at that point in 2017 that, well, future budgets would reflect that information, and it would they'd try to get that together. But now, as we've seen this year, there actually wasn't any line-by-line budget information provided at all. So hopefully we can get a breakdown on insurance premiums that the city is spending, how those relate to policing, and also a actual detailed police budget. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Colleagues, any questions for Chris? Ms. Muller?
Question for Chris, and maybe you were going to do this, Chair. I'd like to know where the line-by-line can be found, because I think we did discuss its accessibility at an earlier meeting. I can't remember which month. Thanks.
I have to check with my staff, but I think if it's not there, we can certainly put it on the website so that people are able to see the line by line. It's quite an extensive document. I think it is there, but I'll confirm that, and if it's not, it will be there.
And if we could make that an annual practice,
yes,
that's
sure.
great. Thank you.
Could I just ask then that it also be included as a link on the board site to the services site, because one doesn't always go looking on both sites for anything policing.
It's, let me just say, I think it's an ever-changing exercise. 2 years ago with Shelley Carroll, we tried to be much more transparent and get things out. Last year, things got truncated because of municipal election. There's always seems to be an excuse, Chris, but the reality is, you know, we're already starting to look at next year's process and how we can be more transparent. When we used to, when I was first on the board, the line-by-line stuff is mind-boggling, and it drives people right into, you know, the details that really you spend too long being deflected at. But you're right, from a transparency point of view, after the fact, we should be having it out there. So the chief operating officer has just agreed that, you know, if it's not there, it will be there. But overall, we're still talking about how we can get a better process.
Thank you. I had actually spoken with and emailed Mr. Veneziano with some suggestions that played into, I think, 2 years ago's format. I don't know. Yeah. I'll have to see what this year's format looks like. So in the long term, okay. I understand it's an evolving process. Thank you.
Thanks. Colleagues, that's item number 11. A motion to, if there's no further questions or discussion, motion to receive the deputation and receive the report. Ms. Chandrasekera, seconded. Ms. Muller, all in favor? Any contrary? Thank you. That takes us to item number 13, which is, sorry, 12. The hate crimes 2018 annual statistical report. And there are two deputations. Brenda Ross, you're first. Brenda, thank you. You've got 5 minutes on the board, and we'll...
Mr. Jeffers, can you help me, please? Do you mind? Thank you. Can I have one, please? Thank you, my dear. Mr. Jeffers and Tony are handing out an item that I've given you previously that Francis Nunziata saw years ago, that you've all seen before, and the reason that I'm giving it to you again is because there have been some developments in the last few weeks regarding hate crimes and my family that I want to bring to your attention. Not just to your attention, I want to know what's going to be done about it. Enough's enough. I was very shocked to hear again Miss Uppala and Miss Notisha are talking again about anti-racism. And you all keep talking about the Anti-Racism Committee and what they're going to be doing for the police service. We're going to have a cultural change. We're going to have this change. When will that be? As far as I can make out from my point of view, as you're going to hear in a minute, we are going backwards, not forwards. People are talking and wasting their time. They're wasting their time, their money, and their effort, because nothing is coming of any of this. Now here's what's happened. I've already brought to your attention for years what has happened in our neighborhood, Police Division 13. And again, we have a number of problems with hate crimes, in particular what's happened in the last few weeks, and I've been told that I didn't speak up quickly enough, so again, I won't be getting any help. My problem is, I don't speak up quickly enough. Well, I wonder how many times I have to come here and talk before it will be quick enough. I'm as quick as I can be. So here's what happened. As you know, as I've told you before, as I've told you I don't know how many times, the community believes that I and my family have something called the evil eye. And so what happens, my friends, when you have the evil eye is somebody tries to punch you in your eye, or worse. Or they leave dead, mutilated animals with no eyes. They poke out the animal's eyes, and they leave those animals for you to find. So again, my friends, I came home to find an animal dead on my property with its eyes poked out. I didn't take it well. I never do. And of course, I reported it immediately. I have been getting, again, bizarre phone calls where the identifying information of the incoming call are words that I've said over my phone. So, for example, I call Mr. Jeffers on the phone and I say XYZ, and suddenly I get a phone call with an identifier indicating what I've just said as the person that's calling from a number that doesn't exist, and often calling from a number that's my number with one digit changed. So again, I've received numerous phone calls. I received a bizarre text message within hours of this animal having its eyes poked out. This one was dead. Some of the animals aren't dead. I don't know if y'all realize, when you mutilate an animal, some of the animals don't die. So when you find them, they're alive. And it has to be dealt with. People that injure animals in this way, that mutilate animals, that kill them, they go right up that chain until they start this on people. It's to be taken very seriously. But once again, after all 2 dead animals since March 23rd, after the dead animals, the phone calls, the text message, after all of this, and I started calling for help again, and I've been told again, call the police immediately, go to the police. I came here to police headquarters, didn't get any assistance. Called 13 Division, no assistance. All this talk from Uppala and Notisha is very interesting, but nothing's coming of it. And when the police do nothing, everybody thinks they can just keep this up endlessly, and they do. A couple of weeks ago again, my daughter was harassed. They don't want her on the street. She can't park there. They don't want this. Who doesn't want it? Who are the bosses of the city of Toronto that don't want people on the street? Who are the people that can kill animals and mutilate them and get away with it? Who can go around poking eyes out? Where's the police? Where's Chief Saunders?
Thank you, Brenda. Colleagues, any questions for Brenda?
Did you, and you know well, you do know the means and ways of lodging official complaints?
Yes.
Have you done so?
Of course.
Yeah? What was it?
Chief Saunders has refused to answer questions and refused to provide information that should be in his domain. I've got another letter about him. I've got a series of letters about Chief Saunders that I don't like. I've been down to OIPRD again. I have filed I don't know how many complaints at OIPRD, and I'll be headed that way again next week. Back to OIPRD. I wonder how sick they are of seeing me. Francis Nunziata, who's sitting here on the police board, could have ended all of this years ago.
Brenda,
and
thank
chose
you.
not to. Chief Saunders, who could have ended all of this, has chosen not to. Uppala chose not to speak up. No one has said one word about what is going on. We now have to change our phone number again, change the phone. We're under some sort of electronic surveillance, apparently.
Brenda, thank you very much. We have another deputation, and that is Derek Moran. Derek, 5 minutes, and I'll give you a 1 minute warning.
By the way, Chair Pringle, did I hear you just tell Kris Langenfeld that you guys were looking for more better ways to increase transparency? Because I have an idea.
Okay, great.
I have an idea. I don't know if you know
Derek,
this.
you're 5 minutes. You're like 11 seconds.
You're not going to
in.
believe this. My idea is answering our questions. So,
Okay, that's good. You're still you're anyway. 4 minutes 36 seconds.
Keeping in the spirit of this item, I just want to mention something that Mayor John Tory recently whipped up at City Council. I don't know if it was one of his famous proclamations or not, but Mayor John Tory, seconded by Councillor James Pasternak, recommends that, 1, City Council once again reaffirm its support for freedom of religion and expression, and further state its opposition to any legislation, or I would say in this case, any board bylaws that would restrict or prohibit such freedoms, and by doing so, Toronto states its position that the city continues to be a source of worldwide inspiration. I just want to thank Mayor Tory for doing that, and I look forward to using it against him every chance I get. So, on a serious note, I just want to say that I could tell that there was a lot of painstaking detail that was put into this item, because I slowly scroll through the whole agenda. But I just want to stress the importance of how much it means to me to know that I can come here one day a week and for a few hours, one day a month for a few hours. What?
Nothing. I was going to correct you that it's monthly meetings.
I know, I corrected myself. I'm sharp like that, Chair Pringle. But to know that, I get 3 hours or so to speak in the presence of Chief Saunders and his officers here, because I want to speak about hate crime in the terms of hate speech. Statistics aside, I just want them all to know what the law, the Supreme Court has said on this matter. So this is Suresh versus Canada, Minister of Citizenship and Immigration, 2002. It is established that Section 2B of the Charter does not protect expressive or associational activities that constitute violence. This court has, it is true, given a broad interpretation of freedom of expression, extending it, for example, to hate speech and perhaps even threats of violence. At the same time, the court has made plain that the restriction of such expression may be justified under Section 1 of the Charter. The effect of Section 2B and the justification analysis under Section 1 of the Charter suggests that expression taking the form of violence or terror, or directed towards violence or terror, is unlikely to find shelter in the guarantees of the Charter. That sounds fair. This is R versus Keegstra, Supreme Court of Canada, 1990. Whereas in the case an activity confers or attempts to convey a meaning or message through a non-violent form of expression, like clapping, this activity falls within the sphere of the conduct protected by Section 2B. This section protects all content of expression, irrespective of the meaning or message sought to be conveyed, no matter how offensive it may be. The government's purpose in enacting this particular Section 319(2) was to restrict freedom of expression by curtailing what people may say. Ross versus New Brunswick School District, number 15, 1996, Supreme Court of Canada. Apart from those rare cases where expression is communicated in a physically violent manner, this court has held that so long as an activity conveys or attempts to convey a meaning, it has expressive content and prima facie falls within the scope of the guarantee of freedom of expression. The scope of constitutional protection of expression is therefore very broad. Rather, freedom of expression serves to protect the right of the minority to express its view, however unpopular such views may be. Bracken versus Fort Erie, 2017, Court of Appeal for Ontario. As expressed in Irwin Toy versus Quebec, 1989, it was Supreme Court of Canada. Freedom of expression was entrenched in our Constitution and is guaranteed so as to ensure that everyone can manifest their thoughts, opinions, beliefs, indeed all expressions of the heart and mind, however unpopular, distasteful, or contrary to the mainstream. Such protection is, in the words of both the Canadian and Quebec charters, fundamental because in a free, pluralistic, and democratic society, we prize the diversity of ideas and opinions for their inherent value both to the community and to the individual. However unpopular, distasteful, or contrary to the mainstream, because that's what really hate speech is. Because there is a maxim of law that says, actio non datur non damnificato, an action is not given to one who is not injured. And you shouldn't be charged with a criminal code offense because you hurt someone's feelings, no matter how vile what you had to say was.
Thank you, Derek. Colleagues, any questions for Derek? If not, Derek, thank you very much. Colleagues, item number 12 for discussion. Mayor Tory, you had some
thank you, Chair. Questions of our police service. Whoever is most appropriate to answer. First of all, do we feel that the groups, there's a number of groups identified here that are the victims of these hate crimes, and I guess the first question I would ask is, do you find it, whoever's going to answer, do you find it at all inconsistent that the report of the hate crime incidents across the country, in fact, I think it's been reported as going up, and in the case of Toronto, it's going down. I mean, I wouldn't want to argue with good news if in fact it's so, but it concerns me that if I sort of just look at the general environment and look at what's going on, that it just strikes me as a little bit, it calls into question, you know, whether we're getting the full picture here, you know, because we're seeing our numbers go down when everywhere else in the country it's going up. At least if I read the national numbers correctly. It was just reported a week or so ago.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My name's Scott Purchase. I'm acting detective sergeant at the security section, which have I got this? It's on? Oh, just closer? My apologies. Acting Detective Sergeant Scott Purchase from the security section, which the hate crime unit falls within at intelligence. Mr. Mayor, we'll be able to provide some clarity to that. And the first piece that will clarify is these statistics in our report here are from 2018. The national statistics are from 2017. That report that came about late last summer were about statistics that came out in 2017. So the national stats are about 8 months behind the end of the year. In preparation for questions such as you've raised, we have canvassed our provincial counterparts in Ontario, and I'll pass the floor over to my colleague, Detective Constable Bisla, who will provide information on that.
Hi, good afternoon. Based on the conversations that we've had with our provincial partners, which is the Hate Crime Extremism Investigative Team, there's 15 member police services, including Toronto. About 50% of those police services, member police services, also experienced a decrease in 2018. There were 5 police services who experienced no change, and 2 services who have reported an increase in 2018 in the number of hate crimes being reported. The 2018 data from Statistics Canada will not be publicly available until late July of this year.
Thank you. I hadn't realized when I read the numbers that they were from 17. Next question was this. In the report, it outlines the fact that 61% of the hate crimes that you do catalog here are, the victims are groups, in fact specifically it's Jewish, people of the Jewish faith, the Muslim faith, and members of the black community, representing 21% of the population. So my question is, do you spend quite a lot of time with those communities? You know, it's noted later on in the section, the very next section of the book that has to do with the kind of police community liaison committees and so forth and all their budgets that are in there, that there's certain amounts of time that are spent by police deliberately with the communities and so on. Do you spend time with them, you as a unit, listening to and trying to address their very particular concerns about the fact that they're disproportionately the victims of these hate crimes and what their needs might be? Because I often hear when I'm out and about needs they have with respect to security at their places of worship and this kind of thing. And do you spend time that would be commensurate with these numbers that show that they are disproportionately the victims of these hate crimes?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we do. We do it on 2 fronts. Directly, we do connect with key members of the communities that you've just mentioned, as well as we leverage our community partnership unit, who have officers who are involved in those specific communities. So if it's a specific event, for example, in the wake of what happened in October in the synagogue in Pittsburgh, we'll reach out to key community leaders. We'll speak to them. We'll address their specific concerns as far as security. We'll provide the most up-to-date information to the unit commanders so they can use that information for specific uniform deployment to reassure the community. And then in the more long-term, we work with our community partnership unit as far as raising the awareness of what hate crime is. One example I remember is last December, the community partnership unit held a conference with the CPLCs from across the city. We presented on that conference specifically what hate crime is, how to report it, how to identify it, how to avoid it, and that was very well received. And that's probably the best example that we have last year of getting right into the community. And again, that's just not our unit, but it's with the community partnership unit.
My final question is this. I noticed in the report it says that every officer is informed of, I think it says it's procedure 516, and that therefore the implication of that is that all of them should be sort of on the lookout and on the listen for hate speech and so on at the different things that they're at, different places they are in the community. I wondered if that means that that's the way in which we're on the lookout for this and for trying to collect evidence, because of course I'm sure one of the tests, as it is with all these cases, is that you have evidence of hate activities. And so if I was to, again, the one that gets discussed often, and it's not the only place where these things happen, is the Al-Quds Day thing. And so is it the case that at Al-Quds Day what you would have is obviously police officers there because there's a safety aspect to this, and that all of those police officers would just be assumed because of procedure 516 to be listening for hate speech, and that that's it? Or are there people that would be there specifically, given the history of some of these kinds of events, listening for, watching for hateful behavior? So how does it work? I mean, does it work the first way, which is that just everybody's deputized in effect to be watching for this? Or are there people that are actually specifically there to try to make sure at events where we know there's some history that they should be keeping an ear out for this?
There are people, officers specifically deployed to there, including our office. We attend rallies such as that for the specific reason for monitoring any breaches of hate speeches. That being said, the uniform officers that are also there, mainly for the public safety aspect, they're aware of the hate crime. We speak to the local crew, sergeants. They're very much in tune with if it's a volatile situation, whether it be what the demonstration that you mentioned, or one of the protests that we have down at Nathan Phillips Square. There's a multi-layered approach, and we just don't leave it to the uniform officers who are there for public safety. We provide on-the-ground support for them while it's ongoing.
And one final question, do we have the capacity? Because my understanding is that in past instances we've had to wait for organizations that will transcribe what amounts to hate speech that is spoken in a different language than English. And I don't know if at some of these we have the capacity to go there and ourselves be able to at least even take a recording and later translate, but preferably even translate at the time what's being said, so that you know when there's these things being spoken that may not be comprehensible to me or to a person who speaks English as opposed to some other language. Do we have the capacity to deal with that, or do we rely on others to do that for us?
We do our best to anticipate if there's going to be a communication in a different language, anticipate what language is being spoken, and have an officer close by to listen to that specific language. There are times where we don't have somebody on scene, but we do have, from the number of officers that we do have an officer that can translate it if it needs to be after the fact.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ken, you were next, and then Uppala.
Just like a comment to this, what I call a phenomenon. There are some groups, when we've had discussions about hate crime, particularly in the black community, there's a sense of cynicism that it's normalized, and so that reporting hate crime, it goes nowhere. I'd like to, first of all, a comment on that, and secondly, in view of what I strongly feel I strongly feel that is a part of how thinking is now evolved, right? Like some groups, not only the black community, have said, look, there's no point. They used to say we had a chip on our shoulder and it was not believable, etc., etc. So what measures are you taking any measures to help the community understand that what their rights are and what the process is and how accessible it could be, and the outcomes that would encourage them to feel to minimize this degree of cynicism?
Thank you for that. To challenge that cynicism, we are taking steps to raise the awareness of hate crime and what it is. And as I touched on, we are reaching out and meeting with community groups, just not through the CPLC. That's one I highlighted in December. We met with a number of community groups that representing many facets of our communities. Those are individually, and we're reaching the people that are in those rooms, and we're hoping that they're taking that away to their communities and passing that along. So there's the sort of the echo effect. One other aspect that we focused on this year was presenting to the neighborhood officers. And with them and those officers being deployed in specific neighborhoods, and those officers having an awareness of hate crime and what a hate crime is, and hopefully having a discussion with members of the community, that will bring a comfort level to bring to report hate crime, or at least talk about it.
Yeah. Well, I certainly hope that there will be measures taken to reassure these groups, as I said, particularly groups that have been historically, victimized in various ways. And there's an expectation, tragically, that is, let me just back that up, that there is an expectation that this happens all the time, has always been happening. And what difference does it make, as I said, right? And so I'm just really, I'll urge you to really look at and talk to some of the leaders in the communities and ask and try to get their support and partnership in conveying the message that the people should come forward. It's the same thing, by the way, that happens with violence. There's an expectation that violence will be happening in certain communities, certain areas, and therefore it's normalized. So it's no big deal, as one young person said to me, right? It's no big deal, it just happens, and that's life. And I think that's a tragic statement too, right? So I just wanted to get your view on that.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, Uppala, and then Francis. No, it wasn't? Okay, Francis, your turn.
Okay, a couple questions. So if somebody wanted to report hate crime, they can go to their local division or call the local division and file a complaint?
Yes, they'll call the, if it's a crime in progress, it could be 911.
But if it's not?
If it's not, our non-emergency number, or attend a police station.
So how do you investigate hate crime?
Well, first,
what if it's verbal?
If it's verbal?
Yeah.
Then it's evaluated what those words are and how they would be targeting the individual. And it falls within the parameters as is laid out in the criminal code.
Okay, so so the other hate crimes, how do you investigate those hate crimes?
So the law addresses hate in a couple of different ways. One is 718. That's when there's a criminal offense. If there's a criminal offense where there's evidence that the offense was motivated by hate, bias, or prejudice, if that individual is convicted, the judge has to take into consideration hate as an aggravating factor and may consider an increase in sentence. There's, in terms of hate speech, there are provisions in the code, specifically for willful promotion of hatred, advocating genocide. Those two require the Attorney General's consent. Those types of investigations, Sir, as you mentioned earlier, with respect to demonstrations, protests, rallies, can be quite complex and complicated. They're lengthier because of language, because of context. And usually we do have to transcribe them regardless of whether it's in a different language or if it's in English, because we look at the words and the messaging, and the threshold is quite high. And then there's the mischief to religious property, which last year now includes, in addition to religious facilities, includes schools, community organizations that are faith-based. If an individual has a complaint for a hate-related offense, whether it's an incident or a crime, the Toronto Police Service does have a procedure. It requires an officer to attend. A person can contact the division, attend the division, but the procedure does require an officer to attend, take the report. That report is then forwarded to the CIB of the division. It's reviewed by the detective as well as the divisional hate crime coordinator. It then filters to our office and is reviewed. And we provide support or our expertise and assist the divisions any way we can in it also assuring that the proper resources and victim support is provided, regardless of whether it's an incident or a hate crime. And that's important so that we can look at trends and identifying areas in which there may be a bigger issue.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry. Do you, by chance, know what the rate of conviction is for the charges that you lay based on hate crimes?
No, we don't keep track of that statistic.
Colleagues, any other questions? If not, discussion? Mayor Tory?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for the work that you do, and I really just want to follow along just in some comments about those made by Mr. Jeffers. I happen to believe that this, there's many serious things that the police deal with and many serious challenges we face in a big city like this, but I think that in terms of potential to be destructive to our way of life and to the very nature of the city, this is a very potentially destructive area, and I think that what Mr. Jeffers said is partly right in that I think you'd end up with more people that would complain if they knew what they were supposed to do, and I think you would end up with a greater degree of recognition of the fact that this is wrong and that it's going to be something that we're going to keep a very careful eye on. If people saw some of the results more so than even in just one report that comes out every year. And so the national report that just came out a year later got some attention. This report will get some attention because it's in this book and at this meeting. And so I believe, especially for the three groups, but that's not for in any way to diminish the other groups that are listed. It's just that those are three that make up 61% of the complaints. I think that from what I hear, they often feel like sort of what Mr. Jeffers said, which is that it sort of goes into this, into the mist somewhere, and that's no offense to what you're doing. You're working hard and you're following the process that was just described so capably, but I don't think anybody really knows about that. And I also would sort of suggest one of the things we might consider, and it's not, we've had our question time, but this is just a suggestion, is applying a standard more like, in terms of the reporting, because I've been looking into this quite a bit in the context of some discussions we've had at the executive committee of the city, and it relies on a kind of a multi-step process, as you were suggesting a moment ago, which is that somebody hears it and records it as in records it in a book or in a notebook or in a recording device. Then they go and examine it and determine whether it contains speech that qualifies under the criminal code section, and then the Attorney General gets involved, and the long and the short of it is by the time all that happens, a lot of time has passed. And I just wonder if we started to sort of adopt a standard which doesn't in any way interfere with anybody's freedom of speech, but it just says we're going to record these things, record as in make note of, record, listen, and adopt a kind of a zero tolerance approach. I'll analogize it to what we do with domestic violence, where we say, look, it's not our job standing at the door to make the judgment about what happened. We're taking note of what happened here, and we're going to let the courts and others sort it out so that we are more frequently reporting to the Attorney General. Because what I hear goes on is that oftentimes we have nothing to report, which, it may well be the case. There might have been nothing to report, but then again, there might have been something to report, deciding, as you said, depending, as you said earlier on context. That to one person, something that's hateful may not be the same as to another, and I'd rather have that being decided upon by, if it was necessary, the Attorney General or a court, as opposed to an individual listener. And I just think that if we got a sort of, I'll call it tougher in that regard about this in terms of the reporting of it, just the reporting, and then you leave it to others to sort of sort out, whether in fact it passes the legal threshold or not. Because I just think right now what's going on is that we're devoting quite a lot of resources to it, and I admire that. It sounds like you're doing an incredibly diligent job with all the different things that were described in the last few minutes. But I think there's a general perception out there that while this isn't as widespread as it might be, literally we have a relatively limited number of cases, thank goodness, in a city like this. I think there's actually more of it going on than we think. And I think that a lot of people are feeling either that they don't bother to report it because nothing happens, or that it gets reported and nothing happens. And that's maybe just a lack of information about what is going on. So I just think it is a very important thing in our city, especially at this point in history, that we should be seen to be addressing this, and people should know how it gets addressed, and that we should adopt a stricter policy about reporting it. Not, so that we err on the side of letting somebody else decide as opposed to just saying, oh, well, I don't think it passes the test.
Colleagues, any other questions? If not, thank you very much. Thank you for the work you do. Colleagues, may I have a motion then to receive the deputations and to receive the 2018 Annual Hate Crime Statistical Report? Ms. Chandrasekera, seconded. Ms. Muller, all in favor? Any contrary? Carried. Thank you. Item number 13, I wanted to hold because I had just a single question, and it was the observation, I guess, that two groups, both, one was the Chiefs Youth Advisory Committee and the other was the Chiefs Advisory Council, did not spend and therefore returned the $1,000. Did they not meet, or what was the challenge there? It's on, Peter.
Good afternoon. Let me first address the Youth Advisory. It's been stood down for the past year and a half. The reason is that we're working with the City of Toronto, my unit community partnership, to work with the City of Toronto, the Youth Cabinet. Because a lot of these participants, if we're going to stand up a Youth Advisory Committee, will be coming from the same group. So I think it's advantageous that we work along with the city and have a more holistic approach to other service agencies participating instead of a standalone TPS Youth Advisory Committee. So this is what is ongoing right now, and I'll report back to the chief with the progress, and I may recommend we resurrect the Youth Advisory Committee, or we stand down and return, so the board doesn't have to give us the $1,000, and so we will partner with the City of Toronto Youth Cabinet. That's the first. That's for the youth.
So just given the importance of youth issues around, and we heard that again when we did the transformational task force and we did a special consultation with youth, I would urge you to come back quickly if it's been stood down for the last 18 months. And I agree with you, you want to coordinate with the city to get the maximum bang for the buck, but at the same time, I think we want to make sure that this is something that's robust because it's obviously important.
I understand that, sir, and that's why we're engaging with the Youth Cabinet, and we're looking at some results, and we are partnering with them on some worthwhile initiatives.
But again, Peter, if it's been stood down for 18 months and we're still working on it, that doesn't sound like it's a priority.
The Youth Cabinet, they do meet, but I want to advise the board that they're very mobile, nimble committee where people comes in and they go. So it's always a new fresh injection of people. So a lot of times we have to go back to the beginning and then refocus. So this is something that we cannot control, but I understand what you're saying to me, Chair. And as far as the Chief Advisory Council, this is at the chief's prerogative when he needs to call one. Then I will assemble the people that are on the council on some topical issues or something that may be sensitive. So we haven't had that opportunity to stand up that committee in the past year.
Okay.
Yeah, I've been speaking with several members of the community about reigniting that, but it would look different. I'm getting a lot of people, I guess it's kind of like a hierarchy piece where they're already on one committee and they want to be on this committee as well too. I want something that has a newer pulse and a newer lens, and in light of today's community, I'd also want it to be more proactive, but definitely I'll reignite that.
I would urge you to do exactly that, I think, because they're both important issues. The other thing I think that, and we saw it, Mark, when we went across the city a couple of years ago after the Transformational Task Force, the differences in engagement by the various. So, I think at some point, relatives in the board would like to see exactly the documentation, the robustness. This is all comes, Peter, with the engagement with the community. While we've provided them, as long as I've been on the board, with $1,000 each, we haven't had ever, that I can think of, a report to the board, nor have we had one of the community liaison groups or consultative groups come and present to the board what they're doing. And so I would urge us, given our focus on community, given our focus on neighborhood officers, that we should be looking at this, and making it more robust. Either, because as we found out when we did the consultations for the Transformational Task Force, there's a lot of opinion out there, and there's a lot of people that participate. And I always attend the annual Saturday, I forget when it was, but a couple of months ago, at the police college. And what did we have out, Peter? There were a couple hundred people?
A couple hundred people,
and,
yes.
But I don't get any sense of coordination. I don't get any sense of best practices on their part. And I think we need to, as a board, see a more robust, as the popular board word of the moment, a more robust kind of presentation about what they're doing and how they're doing it, because there's quite a number of really significant issues that we're dealing with that will affect these various groups, and that their input would be welcomed and very much needed.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Anybody else? Ken, sorry.
At the risk of dating myself, I just want to say quickly that I was fortunate to be one of the initiators of the Youth Cabinet with Jack Layton, et cetera, way back then, and also training a lot of young people through, in the city of Toronto, youth outreach workers. We started that whole concept. However, I'm really, what I don't understand, and perhaps you can help me understand this, is that the city has 45, maybe even more now, youth outreach workers in recreation, whose specific job is to reach out to young people in a recreational setting. And the social service department also has a number of youth, and so does the province, and et cetera. Are we working with them as well in tapping into some of their resources to look at all of these issues?
Mr. Jeffers, the answer is, simple answer is yes. You know we have neighborhood officers in 33 neighborhoods and our community partnership engagement unit. They are on a daily basis working with youth programs there, because I see the monthly report from the neighborhood officers every month that comes to me from the 33 neighborhoods, and they are working with such as Tropicana, Dorset Park, Flemington Park, Alexander Park. They are working with the young people. In fact, some of our officers have received awards, but the bottom line is this, that's a part of the job that we do, and then we are forever. We just had a youth initiative up at Rexdale where we spoke to the Somali youth. So these things are ongoing every day. And the chief gets a report on this brief every day from the officers across the city engaging with the young people.
Yeah, but I was speaking specifically about the youth outreach workers. Because, to my knowledge, they have not been, certainly in recent times, an integral part of the outreach and working with the police officers.
Well, I can say this to you. We have an excellent relationship with the Scarborough Boys and Girls Club, the youth outreach worker, the Dorset Park, Alexander Park, Flemington Park. So we are working with the youth workers, because in order for us to get to work with the kids, first we have to win the youth outreach workers first. They are the housekeeper that allow us into their community. If we don't get a dialogue, a conversation with the youth outreach workers, we're never going to get into their house and start working with the young children. So we do that. That's the first step for our neighborhood officers to get to know the youth outreach workers. Do I sit here and say to you, I know every one of in the city? That wouldn't be possible. We will endeavor to know as many as possible throughout our neighborhood officers, our community response officers, and through community partnerships and engagement unit.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Francis?
Are we having difficulty, and you mentioned that some of them don't attend the meetings and they'll come and they won't come. So are we having problems with getting the youth involved in the advisory committee? Like, is it because they don't want to travel, or is it because they're...
Councilor Nunziata, it's a very... It's a very complicated question.
Yeah.
We want to create one that's a hybrid, where we have youth outreach workers.
Yeah.
But the young people, I will say to you, we had this before, and when I was at 55 Division, as a unit commander, we had a youth CPLC. The issues are, the young people want to participate, but if they're going on to college, university, jobs, so that part of the membership is quite a bit, I would say, fluid, because they will be 1 year, and they'll be gone the next. So we're looking at a hybrid approach where we have youth workers and plus young people on the committee. To answer your question, there has been some challenges having the youth for continuations 4 to 5 years. Where the CPLC and the CCC, you have people for longer term commitments.
Okay, so with some of these youth groups that we have in the area, for example, I have a few in West End, right? So are we trying to partner with them and get them involved? And
for sure we do.
They can recruit and do a lot of that labor.
They do recruit for us, and but the trouble we run into is the young person may stay for 1 or 2 years, and there's no longevity or continuity. So we're looking at the best way to do business and the best approach to how to stand up a youth subcommittee.
Okay, so in this report, then we're taking out the $2,000 that was in the budget.
Returning to the board for this year.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much, Peter. I just wanted to say that I think we should be focusing harder on the message, and at some point develop a strategy and come back with some presentation about what the various units are doing, and because I think I'd like to see exactly what the contribution is, and that we're optimizing and maximizing the leverage in the community in that way. If there's no more questions, colleagues, a motion to receive item number 13, which is the annual expenditure on community consultative groups. Councilor Nunziata, Mayor Tory, all in favor? Any contrary? Carried. Thank you. Item number 14 is the board's consultative expenditures. One deputation, Derek Moran. 5 minutes, Derek. A 1 minute warning.
So as you know, Chair Pringle, I was late last month to the meeting, and afterwards you were kind enough at the end of the meeting to suggest to me next time to take the car and drive down here because of how bad the traffic and congestion is in the city, that there may be a good chance that I'd possibly miss the entire whole meeting. So I just wanted to thank you for that. That means a lot to me. And but I got a chance to see what was said on the tape afterwards. And I just want to point out that the Vice Chair, Marie Molnar here, seemed to mention at some point and set all of you straight that when she mentioned something to the effect of, like, we are the oversight board here. So I just wanted to acknowledge her and thank her for saying that, and stuff like that needs to be mentioned more often. So in this report it says the city's definition of consulting services is as follows: any firm or individual providing expert advice, opinion on a non-recurring basis to support, assist management decision-making in the areas of technical information, technology management, research and development, R&D, external lawyers, and planners, and creative communications. I just want to point out, Chair Pringle, that the City of Toronto, I've been at one, I go to these meetings at the City of Toronto, City Hall too. Mayor Tory's seen me there, he can vouch for me for that. And one meeting, they discussed about how the City of Toronto was going to adopt a policy in which they would only hire vendors who had practiced equitable hiring policies, which seems fair. So I was thinking that the Toronto Police Services Board should do something along the same lines, And hiring lawyers. If you're going to give the public's money to these external lawyers, hiring lawyers that do things properly, practice equitable hiring or whatever practices. And one recommendation I had was, in the future, only hiring lawyers from Ontario who have taken their oath to the Queen. Because I can only imagine, Chair Pringle, the sense of embarrassment you must have looking at some of these lawyers that are connected with the Toronto Police Services Board, considering how many people know this man was actually given the Order of Canada, was it? And you were given it to by the Queen, Her Majesty's own federal mandatory. Was it David Johnston? So, because as we learned last month, this came from Webster's Reference Library, the Canadian Desk Companion, 3 things from what happened in 1992. Miss Canada pageant was scrapped, Roberta Bondar was Canada's first female astronaut, and Ontario lawyers vote to abandon the oath to the Queen. So just to be clear, I object to this item and number 15, the one after this, as I do not approve of the Toronto Police Services Board using the public's money, which is ultimately going to support a club, the Law Society, whose Ontario members voted in 1992 to abandon their oath to the Queen, as doing this is not in the public's interest. And I was just curious, the new executive director here, Ryan Teschner, he's a member of the Law Society of Ontario, right? I was wondering if he could lead by example and provide for me and for everyone who's interested in taking a look at the oath he took to the Queen, which I think would be Section 4, found in Section 4 of the Public Officers Act. By the way, is Georgina here? Georgina asked me by email if I could kindly confirm the letter I got from Ryan, thing we talked about last month. And Ryan responded in 2 pages. I'm going to highlight one thing he said. There is no requirement in the procedural bylaw for members of the board to respond to deputants' statements or inquiries. So I just want to say, if I've led you, Chair Andy Pringle, and or Ryan Teschner here to believe in any way that my intent was to get the members of the board to answer my questions. I don't mean to be rude to anybody, but maybe with the exception of the Vice Chair, Marie Molnar here, I don't think any members of the board are actually knowledgeable enough to answer the questions that I would have. So I'm thinking more along the lines of Jane here, maybe Marianne Wright, Chief Saunders, the other deputy chiefs, or maybe anybody in the back there that would be able to answer questions. Because I asked highly, you've admitted to me yourself that the stuff I talk about goes right over your head. So I have very highly technical questions.
Okay, Derek.
So I'm going to give you guys another mulligan and say that you, I guess, mistaken what I was getting at. And no offense to Ryan, you're the one who told Miguel, you know the rules, you can't ask questions here. Why am I getting a response from him? I want a signed response from you, Chair Pringle, where it exactly says. Ryan said he'd look for the specific rule. So he looks for the specific rule and he tells you, and you send me a signed letter where the specific rule in your own board's bylaw says that members of the public can't ask questions at these meetings, okay?
Thank you, Derek.
No, thank you. You said you committed.
Your time is up.
You once said you committed to getting back to an answer on me for this. That's right. That's right. Yes. I don't want to ask members of this board questions, okay?
Thank you. Colleagues, any questions of the deputant?
Thank you, Councillor Nunziata, for penetrating glimpse into the obvious.
Derek, thank you very much.
No, are you going to get back to me? You committed to me getting me an answer.
Thank you for
the specific rule.
Thank you for your deputation.
What Ryan should have just said is there is no specific rule in the procedural bylaw that we can't ask questions. That would be the truth. I mean, if this is the way it's going to be, just show us your true colors and make an amendment to the board's bylaws by saying no members of the public who speak at these meetings can ask questions. What's hard? What's so difficult about that? We've been doing this since, October? Just make it express in clear writing.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you. I want the specific rule you guys talked about. You guys said it. I put it in an affidavit. There's no letters. A letter does not rebut an affidavit. You want to rebut my affidavit, you do it by affidavit. Are you going to give me the specific rule, which, let's be clear, does not exist? What's the specific rule that says that we, members of the public, like, you guys are the hired help? You know what I mean? If anything, when you think about it, you're really the maids and the butlers. The idea that you're telling us, you're paid by the public. You work for us. Who are you people to tell us that we can't ask questions at these meetings?
Listen, your time is up.
Even
Thank you very much.
Even Premier Ford says that we are the boss. You work for the boss, and the boss is the people.
Yes, thank you.
You have no authority. Where do you guys get the authority to tell us that we can't ask questions at these meetings? Are you going to get back to me with the specific rule, yes or no?
Right.
Oh, here we go. More prevarication. Come on. You're the one, Chair Pringle, who at almost every meeting browbeats us and says, well, you know the rules. So why do you need, if you know the rules, why do you need to rely on him to speak for you? You're the chair. You're not even supposed to be here since November 30th, 2018. You tell me what the specific rule is in your board's bylaws that says we can't ask questions.
So listen to the executive director or a lawyer.
Is that, are you giving me an order to listen?
I'm saying the response legally will come from them. So here you are.
Okay.
Derek, thanks for your question again.
You're welcome.
We did correspond with you as you referred, and we referred to Rule 17.6 in the bylaw. The rule says this: upon the completion of a deputation to the board, any discourse between members and the persons making the deputation will be limited to members asking questions for clarification for up to 5 minutes. Members of the board will not enter into debate with the person making the deputation. And then our letter went on to say the following: it should be noted that board members must also comply with the procedural bylaw during a board meeting. While deputants are free to raise issues, ask questions, and explain concerns, there is no requirement in the procedural bylaw for members of the board to respond to deputant statements or inquiries. Indeed, subsection 17.6 does not permit a debate between members and deputants.
I'm not here to debate anybody.
Excuse me.
Excuse me.
Members may ask questions for clarification for up to 5 minutes of a deputant, but no other discourse between a member and deputant is permitted. So to your question, I believe the letter does say that you are technically able to ask questions, and board members are obligated under the procedural bylaw to ask questions for clarification and not engage in a further debate. So if your question is, are you allowed to ask questions? Sure. But the letter also says that members are not going to enter into a debate, and they're not required to answer them.
You're being disingenuous when you say that. I'm not here to debate anybody. I'm here to ask questions regarding the law. The Supreme Court of Canada says in, what was it, Endine, that it is the public's right to know the law and its application. That's the way it is. It's like you people have put blinders on your head, and it's like no matter how much Supreme Court case law or maxims of law or trustee duties I talk about, it's like you just bat it all away. You don't care. It's like you think your bylaws supersede all that stuff? Freedom of expression. I mean, I gave you guys 2 pages worth of Supreme Court case law about freedom of expression. The public's right to know, public's right to be informed, the search for truth, blah, 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 all that stuff. You just don't care. Section 17.6 deals with what happens upon the completion of a deputation. He is being disingenuous when he says that, when he brings that up, okay? I'm not here to talk about what happens after the completion and what a deputation is by definition. I'd love to see what dictionary you guys got that definition. That's something you guys just dreamed up out of thin air, okay? I'm not here to talk about the completion of a deputation. So that what he just said is like invalid. It has nothing to do with what I asked about.
Thank you very much. We've given you the answers.
No, you haven't given me the specific rule where it says in your board's bylaws. Amend your bylaws and put it in there in plain English. Members of the public cannot ask questions. That at least will be fair. You'll show us for what you guys really are, your true colors. You're not here in the public's interest.
I think it is pretty clear.
No, it is not clear. Section 17.6 deals with what happens upon the completion. Like, am I speaking English here? I'm not speaking in Sanskrit, am I?
Would you please step away from
what happens upon the completion of a deputation has nothing to do with what I'm talking about.
We'll have to take a recess and ask you to leave.
Just give me the specific rule that says we can't ask questions.
Derek, thank you very much. You've heard the legal answer from the executive director, who you pointed out is also a lawyer.
Who didn't take his oath, who's a member of the Law Society of Ontario and hasn't taken his oath to the Queen. So what credibility does he have?
Jane?
I can only add that we reviewed the letter together. We've provided the answer. As the executive director said, you are free technically to ask questions.
Of the board.
I think that's been asked and answered. There's no obligation to answer your questions. If you prefer to raise questions, you may do so.
Can I ask questions of those who aren't members of the board? Where does it say that in your precious bylaws, huh?
Derek, I think you've made your points. The items is done. Would you please step aside so we can get on with the rest of the meeting?
Where's the specific rule that says people
Derek,
who come
would
to
you
speak
please
here can't
step
ask
aside
questions? I'm not
so
talking
we
about
can get on
debating.
with the rest of the meeting.
I'm not talking about debating you people. I'm not talking about asking members of the board's questions. I'm just talking about asking like I've seen 2 months in a row. I've seen Kris ask questions and he's got answers. Why are you guys discriminating against me?
Derek, thank you very much. I'll give you one more warning. Please, would you step aside from the podium?
No,
Otherwise,
you
I'm going to
told
recess
me,
the meeting.
You told me you gave me
Derek,
a commitment to find the specific
Derek,
rule
would you
that says
step
members
aside?
of the, you're giving me obfuscation, equivocation, prevarication. Okay? I just want the specific rule in your board's bylaws. I mean, if anything, have you read section 1.4 of your bylaws?
Colleagues, we're going to take a brief recess here.
You guys are a
Thank you
bunch
very
of
much.
babies. Section 1.4 of your own rules says that the Toronto Police Services Board wants to ensure that those rules reflect the principles of accessibility, responsiveness, and accountability to the community, fairness, respect, and full debate in the conduct of its meetings, and flexibility in responding to changing circumstances at meetings of the board. Black's Law Dictionary defines responsiveness.
So we have had the annual report. First of all, are there any questions on item number 14, which is the annual report and consulting, board's report on consulting expenditures? If not, a motion to receive the deputation and receive the report. Mr. Jeffers, and seconded Ms. Chandrasekera. All in favor? Any contrary? That's carried. That takes us to, what, item number 17, is that next? And item number 17 is Kris Langenfeld, the deputation. Kris, 5 minutes.
So, as I raised before, I was actually going to again ask the question or deal with this question of the color of the cruisers. And you'll notice I asked that maybe we could get some reporting back on the figures, but of course no motion was made by anybody on the board to actually obtain those figures, or it didn't happen that I saw in the public record. So I hope somebody will actually make that happen so that that information is released. Meanwhile, since I'm here, there's now 2 incidents that have happened, and Derek, in response to your questions, I would say the answer is that what Mr. Pringle tends to tell you, you can assume probably isn't true, and the reason that he can't find a rule that says that you can't ask questions is because, as they've acknowledged, it doesn't say that, and so your best bet is simply to ignore them and watch the clock and follow that. Whether it's clapping or whatever, it's probably not the reality. And of course, the same goes with these rules that you've created for the bylaws. The fact that you seem to argue, as Mr. Teschler just read there, that you're going to censor board members and limit them to 5 minutes, they can ask questions in follow-up. Of course, that's not true either. The fact is that they're appointed here, and this isn't Mayor Tory's little private control system here where his friends can
Mr. Langenfeld,
have total control over this matter of the service. The fact is that this board has 3 provincial appointees who are here because they're supposed to act so that this is not simply a municipally controlled police force. The law is specifically designed under the Police Services Act so that there are individuals who are accountable and appointed for their position on to hopefully
Kris,
try
would
and...
you please address item number 17, which is the cooperative purchasing group purchases, the annual report, which is what you're...
So as I say, if you simply ignore the chief and continue, or I should say the chair, and keep speaking, that the, my apologies, chief, I didn't mean to imply anything. But the fact is that the provincial appointees are supposed to be here so that they can represent us beyond the control of a simple municipal control of a board, and that this is supposed to be accountability to the people. The other thing I'd like to point out is the fact that you had the group here from the hate crimes unit,
Kris,
and having had somebody report that there wasn't a follow-up on any of the issues that they'd reported, and that they'd asked for police assistance and reported crimes, and the officers had in fact refused to file a complaint and deal with the matter, and none of you turned around to the people that are in charge of the hate crimes unit and asked them to look into it and to actually deal with this matter. I would have thought that that would have been appropriate for this board.
Kris.
And of course, you know, as we know, this chair is good at censoring the people because he doesn't believe in freedom of speech. And of course, the courts have already ruled on that, and we'll be back on Tuesday, folks, next Tuesday, when the Court of Appeal for the chief's appeal of the decision that this board has violated the Constitution. The fact is that this board is here to allow the public to speak to you and to also hear the information
Kris,
that you're saying.
You don't seem to be interested in the item at all. I understand what you're trying to say, but we're not going to discuss it. So
as I've said, you've already failed to address any of the matters that I've raised here. I asked you to follow up on this question of procurement of the shared issue, the shared
let me warn
matter.
you one more time. Would you please step away
That
from
I've
the
only
podium?
got a minute left of speaking
You haven't
time? Is that
addressed the
what you're
item.
warning
Forget
me
looking
on?
at the clock.
Pardon?
you haven't addressed the item that we've asked you to.
So
please.
Once again, you're telling me what I can talk about. This is your belief in your role as chair of a government board, that you get to dictate what the people of this free society are able to say. That's your idea of freedom of expression, right? You'll give them the words and they'll parrot them back to you, and then you'll expect people with guns to follow up for you and to shoot the people that don't follow the line, your toed line, right?
Kris, thank you very much. Please step away from the microphone.
You got 14 seconds left, Kris.
Yeah, I know, and I'm also speaking on the next item here, so.
You know how sad is it? We got to appeal to the police officers here in the room to uphold the Constitution. When you're the board, provide oversight to them.
I'll move the recommendation on 17.
Let me just ask everybody, remind everybody that we'll stop interrupting. Francis, you've got the mic.
Yes, I'll move the recommendation
Okay.
on item 17.
So is there any further discussion on the item number 17? If not, Francis, you're moving a motion to receive it and the deputation. A seconder? Mayor Tory, all in favor? Any contrary? Thank you, it's carried. Item number 18, we have a deputation, and Mr. Langenfeld, it is you again. I remind you this time, please stick to the item, which is the Toronto Police Services 2017 Pearls in Policing Conference, and you've got 5 minutes.
So I think your bylaws also, is this mic on? No? Is that on? No, it's okay. I think your bylaws also state, of course, that the people giving deputations won't be interrupted. And of course, Mr. Pringle, we all well know that you tend to eat up a whole lot of people's time shouting at them so that they can't be heard. But that's okay. That's what the CPLC or who is it? The CC, the Civilian Oversight Board that takes care of firing boards like the Thunder Bay Police Board. Hopefully they'll do the same with you. As for the Pearls in Policing, of course, this goes back to 2017, and you'll remember I dealt with this. There's 2 paragraphs here in that report, and again, I didn't have a whole lot of time to review these documents since the 393 pages were released a day and a half before we were required to make our appointment to speak here. But it does say in that report, the funds are shared between the Pearls Secretariat, the Hong Kong Police Service, and the service. So I'd like to know how much money did the people of Toronto give to the Hong Kong Police Service first. Secondly, it then goes on in this report to say total revenue incurred by the service was $338,000 and change, with expenses totaling $197,000 and change. The service returned $140,000 and change to the board's special fund. So you can clarify for me, does that mean that in fact the taxpayers paid I'm not sure if it's $200,000 that it cost us, or $190,000 or $90,000, or what exactly this party for foreign police chiefs cost the taxpayers of this city. But then I notice in going through that report, the whole extent of what the chief says was the benefit of this was to get their idea of what they're doing in terms of dealing with people with mental health issues and people in crisis. Of course, we had the anti-racism group up here, and they're not spending anywhere near that money, and apparently they're able to make a couple of phone calls and get best practices from all over the world. But we here, we've got to bring all the police chiefs, or at least a select group of police chiefs, to our city to have secret meetings. And I don't know if it clarifies in this report, it probably doesn't, but I'm still quite confident that in the fact that your illegal searches of people in violation of their rights in this building, what has been ruled unconstitutional, and despite the chief's appeal that he believes that every private owner has the right to search people, and in fact a duty under the laws he's quoted, that the Ontario Health and Safety Act requires people to do things by duty. It doesn't give them the option. So I don't think that you're going to find that the panel of judges is going to make that ridiculous moronic ruling that everybody is required to search everybody. And so hopefully then, since that appeal is going to be over as of next Tuesday, and hopefully the judges rule quickly, that we will then be dealing with the fact that the other 30 days or 29 days of a month, you're still violating people's rights here and conducting illegal searches. And when we get those insurance numbers that I've asked for, I'm sure we're going to have a couple of $100 million more in lawsuits against this city for the tens of thousands of people that you've illegally searched in this building, and for their property that you've stolen through threats of violent attack. And so we'll be dealing with that, and I will expect that to be on the board. The fact that over a year now, or since June of last year, that decision's been out, and this board and you, Mr. Pringle, have failed to put it on the agenda and to deal with the fact that the courts have ruled that this service has acted unconstitutionally, and you've done absolutely nothing about it, including not even talked about it, is ridiculous. And it certainly fails to fulfill your requirement of oversight and responsibility. Yes, and I can see you can all look at the clock there and ignore me for another 44 seconds and then move on, as you've been known to do. And of course, will you, as you told me last time, take it to the courts. And I did that, and presumably a lot of people are going to start questioning any time that Andrew Pringle is appointed to their board, because they're going to know something's illegal going on, and the people are looking for somebody to cover it up. And that's what Andy Pringle's there for, whether it's the Upper Canada College apology for raping children, or whether it's this services of sexual attacks of people being searched illegally, and we know the OIPRD claims coming up on that. We'll see what happens in future. Nope. And I'm here on number 19 as well, so I'll wait.
Okay, colleagues, any questions on this issue? Mark, this is, I think, the first time this has come back since the Pearls and Policing Conference. Anything you want to comment on its success?
As we continue to strive to look for opportunities and avenues when it comes to a critical piece of policing which deals with people that live with mental health issues, having an opportunity to do research for a full year with a multitude of different agencies, and then coming back and talking about some of the best practices to make sure that we are aligned with what's going on, I found to be valuable, and there's some things that we have looked at and we're further exploring. This year it's on technology, and again, having a multi-lens look at some of the opportunities there, I think will be of great assistance to the organization, just to make sure that we are in check and aligned properly, and to see what our level of productivity is and forwardness compared to other agencies. I see value in the organization, and by all accounts, the feedback from the other agencies have been very positive with the organization.
Colleagues, any questions or discussion? If not, a motion to receive the deputation and receive the report on the 2017 Pearls and Policing Conference. Councillor Nunziata? Motion to receive? Yeah. Seconded. Mr. Jeffers? All in favor? Any contrary? Carried. Item number 19, you're right, there's a deputation, and this is the civic litigation proceedings, and it is Mr. Langenfeld. So, Kris?
So this again deals with, of course, the historical data related to carding and all its various forms through the years before it was made illegal. And what I didn't see in the report, and again, I didn't have a chance to review it thoroughly, but I didn't spot anyways the current actual status of what all the data is. And I'd like to suggest that it would be perhaps appropriate to be able to, obviously you've often argued that, well, this data needs to be retained in case of litigation and that it needs to be provided in response to requests for disclosure and things like that. And you have a few ongoing cases, but in fact, I would assume in all those ongoing cases, all that data has been set aside for those people and properly disclosed to them. So that wouldn't justify the service actually retaining the data anymore for any other purpose. Once it's disclosed, it would be presumably with the lawyers involved, and it wouldn't be needed by either the board or the service. And in terms of responding to any other new claims that may come out, I would suggest that it would presumably be sufficient to simply delete all the data with the exception of the name and date of the person involved. And that way, if somebody requests information as to whether or not they were carded, you can confirm whether or not they were in fact a victim of that illegal activity. But you could eliminate all the actual data of who they were with, where they said they were going, and all the other questionable information that was collected with that in the carding process, and the reason that it was in fact made to be illegal, and that police are no longer permitted to arbitrarily collect that information, that you could delete all that other detail and simply retain the name and date that the people were carded, and that would be sufficient to satisfy any requests for disclosure and any legal proceedings that may come against you. But it would deal with the problem for all the other people that have concerns about this data being held. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of Mr. Langenfeld? Any colleagues, any discussion on the report? If not, a motion to receive the deputation and receive the report. Mayor Tory? So moved. Seconded, Mr. Jeffers. All in favor? Any contrary? We have one more item, and we need a motion to add it to the agenda, and that's the walk-on item number 20, which is the retention of transgender subject matter expert. Motion to add that, Ms. Chandrasekera, seconded Mayor Tory. All in favor? Any contrary? Okay, the item is on. Are there any deputations to receive for it? If not, then may we get any discussion on it? Does anybody have? Then a motion to approve. Ms. Chandrasekera, seconded Councilor Nunziata. All in favor? Any contrary? So that's carried unanimously. And oh, yes, so just I draw attention to the notice board that the June board meeting will be held at City Hall, committee room number 2, same time, same place, and same time and places, same time rather, as we've done it recently, and the same place actually as we've done it several times in the past. Ryan, do you... would could we please have quiet, Mr.
That is not funny. Those searches are unconstitutional. I'd rather have the meetings here.
Before we adjourn, I think Mr. Teschner has a response to one of the things brought up earlier. Ryan?
One of the earlier deputations asked questions about a line-by-line budget review, so I'll just point out that on the Toronto Police Service's website, the following information was posted at different stages during the budget process that has passed. The budget presentation to the board, the capital program details including a line-by-line breakdown, operating budget details including a line-by-line breakdown, and reference to the service's budget-related materials. There was a posting shortly after each stage of the budget process was completed. That information remains on the Toronto Police Service's website at torontopolice.on.ca/budget.
Thank you, Ryan. Colleagues, any other business? If not, a motion to adjourn. Ms. Chandrasekera, seconded Mr. Jeffers. All in favor? Any contrary? Carried. Thank you very much.